It is good that you are here to record this picture of me in my palace garden at Addis Ababa. People who see this throughout the world will realize that even in the 20th century, with faith, courage, and a just cause, David will still beat Goliath.
The Crypto Jews documentary is an amalgamation of publicly accessible resources. It is not intended to incite violence, but rather aims to uncover truths, presenting information for viewers to contemplate and discern independently. The documentary encourages a thoughtful examination of the provided resources.
Prepare for an illuminating journey in this documentary, where profound revelations await. As we delve into the mysteries that lie ahead, you'll soon find yourself unraveling the secrets of crypto Jews, discovering the identities of the lost tribes of Israel and Judah, and understanding the profound significance between ethnic Judah and Israel, as well as those who embrace Judaism through conversion. Our exploration begins by unveiling the history of Ashkenazi Jews, spanning countries like Germany, Poland, and Russia, but also with heavy emphasis on the hidden Khazarian Empire. From there, we'll unravel the heritage of Sephardic Jews, with roots extending into Spain, Portugal, and North Africa. Finally, we'll navigate the diverse realms of Mizrahi Jews, whose history spans countries such as Iraq, Iran, and Yemen. As our exploration deepens, we'll uncover a pivotal shift that occurred between a people who adhered to their ancient traditions and converts who embraced these rites, ways, and culture, molding them into a man-made religion. This transformation marks a significant juncture in the narrative, where the organic evolution of beliefs meets the intentional shaping of a faith. The following is a thought-provoking excerpt from Ethiopian WorldNet on YouTube. It's crucial to underscore that the historical demonization of melanated people, including Ham and Cush, finds its roots in specific interpretations from European Jews, particularly through their Talmud. As we dive further into this topic, we aim to shed light on the complexities surrounding these interpretations and explore the impact they have had on shaping perceptions. Stay tuned as we navigate through the historical context and strive to foster a deeper understanding of the nuances involved in this discourse. Your engagement and open-mindedness are encouraged as we embark on this journey of knowledge and enlightenment.
Before the Lord, before the Lord, before the Lord, before the Lord. And nowhere is before the Lord in a negative sense. But the lion-ass Jew in his footnote, the counterfeit Jew, the synagogue of Satan, lies against this mighty black man. Why is that? Why? There's the question. Why? He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, before Yahweh. So was he a bad guy? No, it's because of what was his father. His father was Cush. Cush means Ethiopia. You understand? And Ethiopia is their worst nightmare. Why? Because Ethiopia is testimony to their lion-ass ways. Basically, he was a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh. Even as, this seems like it's a positive thing. It's almost like saying, like, even as it is said, David was a man after the Lord's own heart. Even that is said. David was a man after the Lord's own heart. So when you say that somebody is after the Lord's own heart, that's positive. When you say one is a mighty hunter before the Lord, in other words, he did his hunting not behind the Lord's back, not in secret or in darkness, but he was a hunter for the Lord. But a hunter of what? Here's the key. This is where we get the connection that he hunted reptiles and reptilians. You see what I'm saying? In 1 Chronicles 1:10 it says, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one upon the earth. Right? For such a big bad boogeyman, he's only mentioned 4 times in the text of the Bible. You understand? Only twice in the Torah. You understand? And then 3 times in the Tanakh. Well, if you include Micah, let's include Micah, since the Tanakh is the Torah, the Nabim, and the Ketubim. So he's mentioned once in the Torah. He's mentioned once in the Ketubim, the writings, 1 Chronicles 1:10. He's mentioned once in the Ketubim, the writings, and he's mentioned once in the Nabim. Now, if you go look up Satan, you understand, in the Bible or the Hebrew of it, you'll find it many times. Your devils all the time. You know what I mean? Basically. But this is supposed to be a big bad boogeyman according to the counterfeit Jews and counterfeit Christians. But in Micah chapter 5 verse 6, here's what is key. It says, and they shall lay waste the land of Assyria with the sword. Remember our earlier reading of just a couple of, in the last segment of this, we just talked about the verses in Isaiah speaking on the Assyrian. Well, here it says, and they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod in the entrances thereof. So 2 different lands. The land of Nimrod. What land is that? Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian. You see that key right there? Deliverance from the Assyrian. The Assyrian are some of the real bad boys of the Bible. Think about it from the biblical perspective. When he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders. So when you look at who is Assyria come from, where does the Assyria come from? Ashur. Ashur. From Ashur. See, here's where we begin to see a cipher and a connection right here. So Nimrod, he was a mighty hunter before Yahweh. And that was in a negative sense. Don't believe the liars. When they say that Nimrod was a big bad boogeyman, a black man, just tell them that they're a bunch of racists. You understand? And there's no biblical proof to prove that Nimrod was a big bad black man, boogeyman, evil man. The reason why they say this is because he was a Cushite, because he was an Ethiopian. Because when you put it together, you understand? When you put it together, in fact, let me just do this right here. Let me just click on the verse, even as Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, Genesis 9:10, right? And the word before is panim, or fanim, right? Panim, fanim. Let me look up something right here. That is 6440, according to the Schofield lexicon, 6440. Panim means face or faces, presence or persons, face of seraphim or cherubim, face of animals, face, surface of ground. It says before and behind, toward, in front of, formerly, forward, from, before, time, before, with preposition in front of, before, in the front of, in the presence of, in the face of, at the face of, or front of, from the presence of, from before the face. This is all how it's used. And now here's what's very interesting about this word panim or fanim. In the Hebrew they pronounce it panim. Is that it's connected with something called the pineal. You know what pineal means? Pineal? The pineal gland. But in the Hebrew Bible, pineal means the face of God. But the pineal within human anatomy, the pineal gland is a very important gland that connects us to the higher ethers, or to the God, and to the true source. It's from the obsolete Pinu, or Pinu, and Panim, which is for Panim. You understand? And here's what's interesting. Here's what's very interesting. Because Penuel, or Penuel, they say it was a town beyond Jordan, as a physical town. Genesis 32 and 32. Before the Lord, before the Lord, before the Lord, before the Lord. And nowhere is before the Lord in a negative sense. But the lion-ass Jew in his footnotes, the counterfeit Jew, the synagogue of Satan, lies against this mighty black man. Why is that? Why? There's the question. Why? He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, before Yahweh. So was he a bad guy? No, it's because of what was his father. His father was Cush. Cush means Ethiopia. You understand? And Ethiopia is their worst nightmare. Why? Because Ethiopia is testimony to their lion-ass ways. Basically, he was a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh. Even as, this seems like it's a positive thing. It's almost like saying, even as it is said, David was a man after the Lord's own heart. Even as it is said, David was a man after the Lord's own heart. So when you say that somebody is after the Lord's own heart, that's positive. When you say one is a mighty hunter before the Lord, in other words, he did his hunting not behind the Lord's back, not in secret or in darkness, but he was a hunter for the Lord. But hunter of what? Here's the key. This is where we get the connection that he hunted reptiles and reptilians. You see what I'm saying? In 1 Chronicles 1 and 10 it says, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one upon the earth. Right? For such a big bad boogeyman, he's only mentioned 4 times in the text of the Bible. You understand? Only twice in the Torah. You understand? And then 3 times in the Tanakh. Well, if you include Micah, let's include Micah, since the Tanakh is the Torah,
What happens when someone tries to revise the history of your people? This is something that Ashkenazi Jews face due to a false but oft-repeated academic theory about their ancestral origin. What is this debunked origin story? Why are some people sharing it? And what does it say about Ashkenazi Jews and, more importantly, those who are spreading disinformation about them? First, some necessary background info. The 2 largest communities or denominations within Judaism are Sephardim and Ashkenazim. Today's Sephardim, or Sephardic Jews, are the descendants of the Jews who arrived on the Iberian Peninsula after the Babylonian and Roman exiles, before fleeing to southern Europe, the Balkans, and North Africa after the Alhambra Decree, a record that is not contested. Ashkenazim, or Ashkenazi Jews, are those whose ancestors arrived in the Danube Valley and Rhineland areas after the Roman exile.
This is also not entirely true. Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews are largely converts. What you just heard is that Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews migrated from Palestine out into Europe. The truth is, the original melanated Hebrews, Israelites and Jews migrated all over the world, and the ones who ended up in Western and Eastern Europe had their ways stolen and hijacked by the Europeans around them. These Europeans started practicing the ways of these people and began to call themselves Jews as well.
So it was stupid of Hitler to invade Russia when he did, because if he got bogged down, which he did, he would end up trying to invade this part of Russia as the winter is setting in, and it was the terrible conditions of Stalingrad, etc. Right? That's an aspect of war that we need to understand at a realistic level. As humans here now, you have to understand. Most of us are not in the military. Most of the people that are killed by weapons in war, that is to say they're shot or they're blown up by a tank or whatever, most of those individuals will be in the military. But most people who die in war are not in the military. Most people who die in wars are civilians. Most people that die in wars, therefore, as civilians, they are not dying usually from being shot or blown up. They're usually, most of the civilians that die in war die from lack of food, lack of medical care, lack of electricity, lack of transportation, a lack of something, right? And so your local sewer plant gets blown up. Maybe one or two people get killed, okay? So that's the little tiny bit of the population that is civilian that gets killed by a bomb or a bullet, all right? But because that local sewer plant gets blown up, you have an outbreak of cholera throughout the entire region, and instead of just the one or two people that were killed in the explosion, the civilians that were killed at the sewer plant when the place was blown up, you now have perhaps 100,000 people that die, many of them children, because of the conditions of cholera, because you don't have the effective ability to have hygiene. So it is the lack of an effective hygiene system that causes this sort of death. And so you have a food processing plant, it gets blown up, the people that are working there get injured and blown up, but what really is the fall-on effect is that you have starvation throughout the region. So in 1914, there was a revolution in Russia. 1914. 3 years later, the Khazarians out of Ukraine, where am I at here? Out of the Ukraine, the Khazarian mafia out of the Ukraine took over the Russian Revolution through several of their agents, including Vladimir Lenin. Okay, so when that happened the revolution happened in 1914. For 3 years, they held the Tsar and his family captive. So in 1914, there was a revolution in Russia. 1914. 3 years later, the Khazarians out of Ukraine, where am I at here? Out of the Ukraine, the Khazarian mafia out of the Ukraine took over the Russian Revolution through several of their agents, including Vladimir Lenin. Okay, so when that happened the revolution happened in 1914. For 3 years, they held the Tsar and his family captive. And we're in the process of rebuilding the Federation of Russia at that time. This is 1914. From 1914 to 1917, even in the midst of that revolution, even in the midst of the Russian Revolution, the very, very heart of it all going down, Russia had the most effective agriculture system on this planet. Russia fed most of Western Europe and a great deal of Africa and Asia. Russia was the breadbasket for the fucking planet. It was the most efficient production system we've ever seen for food. It has never been equaled on a calorie in to calorie out basis, okay? And in 1917, the Khazarian mafia got really, really, really pissed, and they moved out of Ukraine. They moved out of Ukraine, and they went into Russia, and they called themselves Bolsheviks, and they took over the Russian Revolution, and they destroyed that food system, and all of the people, 2 million plus people on the outskirts, and 12 million people in the greater Khazarian area, Ukraine and so on, and Kazakhstan and all of this. 12 million people in there died from starvation. It was twice the claimed death rate for people killed by Hitler. And you don't ever hear anybody talking about it because it was the Khazarian mafia, the Ukrainians, taking over and doing their shit here that caused this. Here's something you need to know about the Khazarians, okay? The Khazarian Empire extended from this area here, went through, let me get a marker here. So we have here, there we go, better. We have a Khazarian Empire that at one point went over, there we go, into the northern part of India. And we know this, that in spite of the formalities that said that the old Khazarian Empire ended in this area here, we know it extended over as far as this boundary here because there are persistent historical, not myths. They do have some aspects of legend, but they're inculcated into our expressions in all of our languages. So even in Chinese, in China, the cultural work for the Chinese is called The Journey to the West. Really, it's a cool book. Jackie Chan's made several movies about the central characters in that book. All Westerners should read it if you want to understand the Chinese mind. It doesn't aid you understanding the CCP and those people, but it does aid you in understanding the cultural milieu in which China has arisen to the modern state here. Okay, but even in Journey to the West, there are aspects to this little story here. The Chinese had this phrase, this expression, that you had to watch out for the name stealers. We have that same expression arising from Europe in 800 AD. That was when it was written down in 800 AD. It was written down in Europe. Watch out for the name stealers, don't have anything to do with them, all of this kind of stuff. You're just going to get into trouble. And the name stealers here that are being referenced, and the name stealers referenced in China that goes back even further than that 800 AD. Now, this was written down in 800 AD. They may have had it for 1,000 years before that as part of the heritage in the Oralinda, the Codex Oralinda. This is where I'm referencing it, right? But it's written down in other areas, in other literature. I think even Chaucer had a little bit of an allusion to it. But in any event, so it goes back some period of time. And these are the name stealers, okay? Because the Khazarians were this group. Now in China, they described it as if you go far enough west, you will run into these people that will invite you into their village as a traveler. They will feed you. You will have a nice drink. You have a great night. They put you in the best bed in the inn, and then they kill you. Okay? Then they kill you. They take all of your possessions, and they steal your name.
What is a crypto-Jew? A crypto-Jew refers to an individual who secretly practices Judaism while publicly adhering to another religious or cultural identity. Throughout history, crypto-Jews often adopted different religious affiliations due to external pressures, such as forced conversions or persecution. Despite outwardly conforming to the dominant faith of their surroundings, these individuals clandestinely maintained their Jewish traditions, beliefs, and rituals.
The implications of manipulation are evident. The curses of Deuteronomy 28, bestowed upon a people, and the reality of the manifestation within Revelations 2 and 3 become even more apparent.
Now, while you're having dinner with them, and they're getting you drunk and stuff, and they're drugging you up, they were known to really use drugs and be black magic kind of people, right? A lot of black magic is associated with the ability to know how certain drugs will affect the mind, et cetera, and you can introduce them into food. So mostly a lot of magic per se is dealing with drug states for the mind. That aside, the Chinese had the understanding that if you went there, they would get your story. They would steal your name and your story. And so the Khazarians were known by the Chinese, and so, but it was known on both sides. So if you were over here and you were going to try and do business with the Chinese and you went through there, you might run into one of these groups of the Khazarians that would kill you after learning everything they could about you. They would steal your story, then they would go to China, pretend to be you, make the deal, and then go back, and the deal never happened. So they're fucking both sides, really. That was the thing, right? These were truly evil people. Now, both sides of the trade equation understood that there were nasty people, and in the Codex Oralinda they're described as being to the east, and the Chinese are describing them as being to the west. Aha! Anyway, so here we are in our current war, all right? And so in our Budo at the moment, we're discussing the active war that's ongoing, but it's not really a war. They're trying to make it a war in the United States, Britain, France, all these places that are controlled by the Khazarian mafia, right? Politically. because that's what they've done. They've stolen lots of names and they've inculcated themselves all over the fucking planet as a hidden control mechanism.
The revelation of this truth neither glorifies nor chastises either side of history, as a profound awakening is set to occur. While Deuteronomy chapter 28 vividly depicts the curses befalling a people, consider verses 15, 16, and 68 for context. 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee, and overtake thee. 16. Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. 68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. In the same essence, Revelation 2 and 3 similarly illustrate the reality for those who, having acted upon this knowledge, have further instigated the curses upon these people.
Please excuse any mispronunciation of names given herein. The story of the slaves in America begins with Christopher Columbus. His voyage to America was not financed by Queen Isabella, but by Luis de Santiago, who advanced the sum of 17,000 ducats, about 5,000 pounds today, equal to 50,000 pounds, to finance the voyage, which began on August 3rd, 1492. Columbus was accompanied by 5 Marranos, Jews who had forsworn their religion and supposedly became Catholics. Louis de Torre, interpreter, Marco, the surgeon, Bamal, the physician, Alonso de la Calle, and Gabriel Sanchez. The reference is The International Jew by Henry Ford. Gabriel Sanchez, abetted by the other 4 Jews, sold Columbus on the idea of capturing 500 Indians and selling them as slaves in Seville, Spain, which was done. Columbus did not receive any of the money from the sale of the slaves, but he became the victim of a conspiracy fostered by Bamal, the ship's doctor. He, Columbus, suffered injustice and imprisonment as his reward, betrayed by the 5 Marranos, or Jews, whom he had trusted and helped. This, ironically, was the beginning of slavery in the Americas. The source is Adventures of an African Slaver, published in 1928, page 11. The Jews were expelled from Spain on August 2nd, 1492, and from Portugal in 1497. Many of these Jews immigrated to Holland, where they set up the Dutch West Indies Company to exploit the New World. In 1654, the first Jew, Jacob Bar Simpson, immigrated from Holland to New Amsterdam, or New York. And in the next decade, many more followed him, settling along the East Coast, principally in New Amsterdam and Newport, Rhode Island. They were prevented by ordinances issued by Governor Peter Stuyvesant from engaging in the domestic economy, so they quickly discovered that the territory inhabited by the Indians would be a fertile field. There were no laws preventing the Jews from trading with the Indians. The first Jew to begin trading with the Indians was Hyman Levy, who imported cheap glass beads, textiles, earrings, armbands, and other cheap adornments from Holland, which were traded for valuable fur pelts. Hyman Levy was soon joined by Jews Nicholas Lowe and Joseph Simon. Lowe conceived the idea of trading rum and whiskey to the Indians and set up a distillery in Newport, where these 2 liquors were produced. Within a short time, there were 22 distilleries in Newport, all of them owned by Jews, manufacturing and distributing firewater. The story of the debauching of the Indians, with its resultant massacres of the early settlers, is a dramatic story in itself. It is essential to comprehend the seaport of Newport. It is important in order to recognize the Jewish share in the slave commerce. There was a period when it was commonly referred to as, quote, the Jewish Newport World Center of Slave Commerce, unquote. Altogether at this time, there were in North America 6 Jewish communities: Newport, Charleston, New York, Philadelphia, Richmond, and Savannah. There were also many other Jews scattered over the entire East Coast. Although New York held first place in the settlers of Jews in North America, Newport held second place. New York was also the main source of kosher meat, supplying the North American settlements, then the West Indies, and also South America. Now Newport took over. Newport also became the great trade harbor of the East Coast of North America. There, vessels from other ports met to exchange commodities. Newport, as previously mentioned, represented the foremost place in the commerce of rum, whiskey, and liquor dealings. And to include, it finally became the main center of slave dealings. It was from this port that the ships left on their way across the ocean to gather their black human cargo and then derive great sums of money in exchange for them. An authentic contemporary report based on authority indicates that of 128 slave ships, for instance, unloaded in Charleston within 1 year, their cargo, 120 of these were undersigned by Jews from Newport and Charleston by their own name. About the rest of them, one can surmise, although they were entered as Boston, Norfolk, and Baltimore. Their real owners were similarly the Jewish slave dealers from Newport and Charleston. One is able to assess the Jewish share in the entire dealings of Newport if one considers the undertaking of a lone Jew, Portuguese Aaron Lopez, who plays an important part in the overall story of the Jews and slavery. Concerning the entire commerce of the colonies and the later state of Rhode Island, which included Newport, bills of lading, concessions, receipts, and port clearances carried the signature name of Jew Aaron Lopez. This also took place during the years 1726 to 1774. He had, therefore, more than 50% of all dealings under his personal control for almost 50 years. Aside from that, there were other ships which he owned, but sailed under other names. In the year 1749, the first Masonic Lodge was established. 90% of the members of this first lodge, 14 all told, were Jews, and one knows that only so-called prominent individuals were accepted. 20 years later, the second Masonic Lodge, or King David, was established. It is a fact that all of these members were Jews. In the meantime, the Jewish influence in Newport had reached such proportions that President George Washington decided to pay them a visit. Upon his appearance, both of the Masonic lodges sent an emissary, a Jew named Moses Sysex, to approach the president with a petition in which the Jews of Newport stated, quote, "If you will permit the children of Abraham to approach you with a request, to tell you that we honor you and feel an alliance," and then, quote, "Until the present time, the valuable rights of a free citizen have been withheld. However, now we see a new government coming into being based on the majesty of the people, a government not sanctioning any bigotry nor persecution of the Jew, rather to concede the freedom of thought, which each shares, whatever nation or language, as a part of the great government machine," unquote. It is necessary at this point to consider the disclosures as to who, in reality, obtained this legendary freedom in America at the founding of the Union. To be sure, the province became independent and severed from the English jurisdiction. However, we can see from the petition which Moses Sysex offered President Washington in the name of the Jews of Newport, that it was not in reality this type of freedom which they had in mind. They were merely concerned about themselves and their, quote, "own civil rights," unquote, which had been withheld. Therefore, following the Revolutionary War, the Jews were accorded equal rights and freed of all restrictions. And the Negroes? Well, the Revolutionary War notwithstanding, they remained slaves. In the year 1750, 1/6 of the population in New York was Negroid, and proportionately in the southern parts of the country, they outnumbered the others. But the proclamation of freedom did not touch them. More of this later. Let us scrutinize at close range this dismal handiwork of the Jews, which gave them influence and power, so we may comprehend the slave trade. for there has been so much written since that time by the zealous Jewish writers that at the present, long since removed, it might appear natural, for the time element has a tendency to make things nebulous. Let us follow the journey of one ship owned by a slave dealer, Aaron Lopez, which had made many trips to the African coast. For instance, in the month of May 1752, the ship Abigail was equipped with about 9,000 gallons of rum, a great supply of iron foot and hand restraints, pistols, powder, sabers, and a lot of worthless tin ornaments, and under the command of the Jewish Captain Friedman, sailed off for Africa. There were but 2 mates and 6 sailors comprising the crew. 3½ months later, they landed on the African coast.
Before black people were colonized by Europeans, we were known as members of the tribe of Judah, one of the largest slave ports in West Africa. Where many of our ancestors were stolen from was labeled the Kingdom of Judah. This is a 1747 map of Africa created by English cartographer Edward Bowen. This map shows specifically where the ancestors of many African Americans came from. You can view the full map on the website of the Library of Congress. The Kingdom of Judah was in what is now called Benin. According to the Washington Post, it was once West Africa's largest slave port. In the 1870s, French public research university called the University of Montpellier put out a book called, pardon the pronunciation, Société Lagowandosienne Géographie.
Did you get that? This port, the Kingdom of Judah, was once known as the largest slave port. The largest export of slaves came from the Kingdom of Judah in West Africa.
The book talks about the Kingdom of Judah, stating, Judah is an old city frequented since the 16th century by the Portuguese slavers, who gave it its name. Its inhabitants were said to be Judaic, and they were indeed considered as a remnant of scattered tribes of Israel. In other words, the black people stolen and brought to America are the indigenous people of Israel, aka Israelites, from the Kingdom of Judah.
Do you see what's going on? So-called Jews holding Judeans captive, white Jew on black Jew imprisoning and enslaving, ethnic Jews versus Gentiles who practice a religion interpreted through the lenses of their Talmud.
Meantime, there had been constructed an African agency by the Jewish slave dealers, who had corralled them and prepared them for sale. This organization, reaching deep into Africa, had many ramifications, including the heads of groups, villages, etc. This method to win over these leaders for the Jewish slave trade was similar to that which the Jews had employed with the Indians. At first, they presented them with rum, and soon found themselves in an alcoholic delirium. When the gold dust and ivory supply was exhausted, they were induced to sell their descendants. At first their wives, and then their youths. Then they began warfare among each other, plotted and developed mostly by the Jews. And if they captured prisoners, these too were exchanged for rum, ammunitions, and weapons to the Jews, using them for further campaigns to capture more Negroes. The captured blacks were linked 2 by 2 and driven through the medieval forests to the coast. These painful treks required weeks, and some of them frequently became ill and felled by exhaustion, and many unable to rise, even though the bullwhip was applied as an encourager. They were left to die and were devoured by wild beasts. It was not unusual to see the bones of the dead laying in the tropical sun, a sad and gruesome reminder of those who would later on tread this path. It has been calculated that for each Negro who withstood the rigors of this wandering, there still had to be the long voyage across the ocean before they reached American soil. 9 out of 10 died. And when one considers that there was a yearly exodus of 1 million black slaves, then, and only then, can one assess the tremendous and extensive exodus of the African people. At present, Africa is thinly populated, not alone due to the 1 million literally dragged out of huts, but due to the 5 to 9 million who never reached their destination. Once they reached the coast, the black slaves were driven together, and restraints were applied to hold them until the next transport ship docked. The agents, many of them Jews, who represented the chief, then began the deal with the captain. Each Negro was personally presented to him, but the captains had learned to become suspicious. The black one must move his fingers, arms, legs, and the entire body to ensure that there were not any fractures. Even the teeth were examined. If a tooth was lacking, it lowered the price. Most of the Jew agents knew how to treat sick Negroes with chemicals in order to sell them as sound. Each Negro was valued at about 100 gallons of rum, 100 pounds of gunpowder, or in cash between $18 to $20. The notations of a captain inform us that on September 5th, 1763, one Negro brought as much as 200 gallons of rum, due to the bidding amongst the agents raising the price. Women under 25 years, pregnant or not, resulted in the same measure if they were well and comely. Any over 25 years lost 25%. And here it should be stated that those Negroes purchased free at the African coast for $20 to $40 were then resold by the same slave dealers in America for $2,000. This gives one an idea how the Jews managed to acquire tremendous fortunes. Following the bargaining, Captain Friedman paid the bill, either in merchandise or cash. He also recalled some advice which his Jewish employers gave him as he left Newport for Africa. Quote, "Pour as much water into the rum as you possibly can," unquote. In this manner, the Negro chiefs were cheated 2 times by the Newport Jews. The next step was to shave the hair from the head of the acquired slaves. Then they were bound and branded with a hot iron, either on the back or the hip, identifying them with their owners. Now the Negro slave was indeed the property of the Jewish purchaser. If he fled, he could be identified. Following this procedure, there was a farewell celebration. There were instances when entire families were brought out of the interior to the coast, and then separated through the byre, the father going with one ship, the sons and daughters into another. These farewell celebrations were usually packed with emotion, tears, drama, and sadness. There was little joy, if ever. The following day, the transports began from land to ship. It was managed by taking 4 to 6 Negroes at one time in rowboats to the ship. Of course, the slave dealers were aware of how the Negro loved his homeland above all else, and could only be induced by great force to leave it. So, some of the Negroes would leap into the water, but here the overseers were prepared with sharp dogs and retrieved the fleeing men. Other Negroes preferred drowning. What came aboard alive was immediately undressed. Here was another opportunity to jump overboard and reach land and freedom. But the slave dealers were pitiless and ruthless. They were merely concerned to get their black cargo to America with the least loss. Therefore, an escapee, recaptured, had both of his legs cut off before the eyes of the remaining Negroes in order to restore order. On board the ship, the Negroes were separated into 3 groups. The men were placed in one part of the ship, the women into another, whereby the lusty captain arranged it so that the youngest, mostly comely Negro women were accessible to him. The children remained on deck, covered with a cloth in bad weather. In this fashion, the slave ship proceeded on its journey to America. In the main, the ships were too small and not at all suitable to transport people. They were barely equipped to transport animals, which the Negroes were likened to. In one space, 1 meter high, 39 inches, these unfortunate creatures were placed into a horizontal position, pressed close together. Mostly, they were chained together. In this position, they had to remain for 3 months until the end of the voyage. Rarely was there a captain who sympathized with them or evidenced any feelings whatever for these pitiable creatures. Occasionally, they would be taken in groups to the deck for fresh air, shackled in irons. Somehow these Negroes were expendable and endured much. On occasion, one of them became insane, killing the other one pressed closely to him. They also had their fingernails closely cut so they could not tear at each other's flesh. The most horrible battles came about among the men to acquire a centimeter or 2 for a comfortable position. It was then that the slave overseer stepped in with his bullwhip. The unimaginable, horrible human excrement in which these slaves had to endure these trips is impossible to describe. In the women's quarters, the same conditions prevailed. Women gave birth to children lying pressed closely together. The younger Negro women were constantly raped by the captain and the crew, resulting thereby in a new type of mulatto as they came to America. In Virginia, or in any other southern port cities, the slaves were transferred to the land and immediately sold. The regular auction would take place, following the method of purchase in Africa. The highest bidder obtained the ware. In many cases, due to the indescribable filth, some of the blacks became ill during the sea voyage from Africa to America. They became unemployable. In such cases, the captain accepted any price. It was rare to dispose of them, for no one wanted to purchase a sick Negro. Therefore, it is not surprising that the Jewish, unethical doctor senses a new form of revenue. They purchased the sick Negro for a small sum, then treated him and sold him for a large sum. On occasion, the captain would be left with a few Negroes for whom he did not find a buyer. In that case, he returned to Newport and sold them to the Jews for cheap domestic help. In other cases, the Jew owner of the ships took them over. This is why the city of Newport and its surroundings had 4,697 black slaves in the year 1756. Slavery did not extend to the North. Moreover, in many of the North American colonies, slavery was strictly forbidden. Georgia came under discussion, likewise also Philadelphia, and again it was the Jews who managed a loophole, which had given them freedom following the Revolutionary War. So they schemed to make slave trading legal. One had but to read the names of those persons living in Philadelphia who were requesting the elimination of existing laws regarding the slavery dealing. They were the Jews Seneford, Lay, Woolman, Solomon, and Benezet. That explained it all. But let us turn back to the slave ship Abigail. Its captain, and we are reading from his ship's books, did a profitable business. He sold all of his Negroes in Virginia, invested some of the money in tobacco, rice, sugar, and cotton, and went on to Newport, where he deposited his wares. We learn from Captain Freedman's books that the Abigail was a small ship and could only accommodate 56 people. He managed, however, to clear from one trip $6,621, which he in turn delivered to the owner of the ship, one Aaron Lopez.
Many people today believe that the Israelites were/are white or Middle Eastern. Over 1,000 years ago, around 100 AD, a Roman historian named Tacitus wrote about the race of Jews in his book, Histories. In the book, Tacitus wrote about Jews saying, "Many assure us that they are a race of Ethiopian origin." An English historian named Godfrey Higgins stated, according to many testimonies, the inhabitants of Sudan, Egypt, Arabia, Palestine, Western Asia, and India were Ethiopians, therefore Africans. As we know, Palestine has become another name for Israel. Abraham was the father of the Israelite race. His grandfather from Cush, which is Ethiopia. Abraham was from Chaldea. Historians have proven that the Chaldeans were black. The British historian Godfrey Higgins wrote in the 17th century in his book Anacalypsis about the early inhabitants of Chaldea. Quote, "I admit with great difficulty the theory of all the early astronomical knowledge of the Chaldees have been acquired or invented by his race, and that the Chaldeans were originally Negroes." End quote. We also know that the ancient Israelites looked like the ancient Egyptians, who were clearly black. In 1876, a French geographer named Elisée Reclus also wrote about the same kingdom of Judah on the slave coast in West Africa, in his book called The Earth and Its Inhabitants. He wrote, known to the Europeans by various names of Fida, Hareda, Wida, or Wida, the old writers called it Judah, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews. So, just for those who are keeping score at home, we have a community of Jews who inhabited West Africa, and they were known as Jews by other nations, by other European nations. Just keep that in mind. There was also a Jew community in Timbuktu, Mali. In 1820, an English traveler named James Gray published his book, An Account on Timbuktu and Houssa. This book states, this place is reported to be inhabited by one of the lost tribes of Israel, possibly an immigration from the tribe of Judah. Yehuda, in African Arabic, signifies Judah. Yehudi signifies Jew. It is not impossible that many of the lost tribes of Israel may be found dispersed in the interior regions of Africa. El Hajj and Salam Shabini, collected and formatted by James Gray Jackson, An Account of Timbuktu and Hausa, 1820. Nearly every family among them possesses the law of Moses written upon parchment. The explanation which they give of themselves in connection with their black skin is this, that after the destruction of Jerusalem at the time of the captivity, some of their ancestors, having neither goods nor land, fled to the desert. The fatigue which they endured so great that nearly all the females died by the way, the children of Ham received them with kindness and by intermarriage with their daughters, who were black, communicated their color to their children. These children became generation by generation of a deeper hue until no difference of color now distinguished the children of Shem and those of Ham. There is also a book from the 18th century called A System of Universal Geography, or A Description of All the Parts of the World. This book is by two French travelers, Conrad Malte Brun and James Gates Percival. They were French travelers who traveled around Africa during the time of the slave trade and documented the tribes of Africa. While traveling through the kingdom of Loango, which is present-day Congo, they wrote,
The kingdom of Loango contains black Jews scattered throughout the country. They are occupied in trade and keep the Sabbath so strictly that they do not even converse on that day. They have a separate burying ground very far from any habitation. The tombs are constructed with masonry and ornamented with Hebrew inscriptions. Yes, this is the same place, the kingdom of Loango, or the Congo, that so-called King Leopold came and wreaked havoc on the people, and how they came there and decimated the place for rubber. And they decimated the people of the kingdom of Loango, or the Congo. We cannot emphasize enough the names that the continent of Africa has gone through. This is a map of Negro land. Well, today, those places are known as Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Ghana, the Ivory Coast, Mali, Chad, Cameroon, Central Republic of the Congo, and many, many other names. But you have to understand that these are the same places. And we know that the name of Africa is not mentioned in the Bible, but that landmass was called by many different names. Egypt, Ethiopia, Mizraim, the land of Ham, Eden, many different names, same location. And what is known as the Middle East today was called Israel, Canaan, many different names, same location. So please don't be fooled. Please do your research. And we want to get across the point that the Hebrews were scattered throughout the entire continent of Africa, mainly West, East, and South Africa. Not so much in the North, because in the North they would have ran into the Romans as they were escaping persecution. So again, this is another account of showing who and where the Hebrews are, the many, many different countries that they're scattered to.
All right, so it gets really tricky, and you have to be careful about all of this because you'll get not only lost in the weeds of all of it, the history is fascinating, but you have to be careful because you'll fall into traps that have been set by the Khazarians. All right, so the Khazarians were a nomadic people that are descended from the Mongols that interbred with people and had a particular phenotype. Now, this particular phenotype this clan of the Khazarians was in a real bind at one point because they were trapped between the Byzantine Empire, which was also the Holy Roman Empire, and they were trapped between Turks in the rising Ottoman Turkey Empire. And they had a big problem. They couldn't go and deal with the Turks without fighting with the Holy Roman Empire. They couldn't deal with the Holy Roman Empire without fighting with the Turks, so they were squeezed. So they decided to claim that they were Jews, and so they couldn't be Christian, they couldn't be Muslim, but they wouldn't be fucked with by either of them. But the fact is that the clan here was not descended from Shem through Judah. Right? I mean, it's not descended from that line biblically. So these people at that time were 3%, 4% of a larger population in this region in here that was related to them by clan. So they were related to the Germans, the Poles, etc., because they'd been interbreeding for some period of time. This population in here decided that they were going to be Jewish, and within their understanding of Judaism, these people devised I guess we could say it was a scheme, a plot, a plan, etc., that spread a particular understanding through not only through Judaism, but through Christianity. It impacted Christianity because of what books were left out of the Bible, and because these people had control over King James and the people that were doing King James Bible, all of this kind of stuff. These people had control over a lot of that. So they have altered history, philosophy, viewpoints, all of these things in order to protect themselves, because they were the name stealers. They were going to steal names real big and go on and promulgate it to the point where we're here now.
Revelations, chapter 2, verse 9. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan.
The staggering amounts of money acquired by the Jew shipowners and slavery dealers is better illustrated when we emphasize the many years in which this sale and purchase of human flesh was practiced. Prior to 1661, all the colonies had laws prohibiting slavery. It was in that year that the Jews had become powerful enough to bring about the repeal of these laws, and slavery began in earnest. The Jews had discovered that the colonists needed additional manpower to help them clear their fields for planting, helping in the construction of dwellings, and in general to help with harvesting their crops. This was particularly true of the southern states, which we have referred to earlier. The Southerners had vast tracts of rich soil suitable for rice, cotton, tobacco, and cane sugar. At first, impoverished Europeans were recruited. English prison doors were opened, and finally prisoners of war from England and Holland were brought to the colonies, made to work until they had paid the cost of transporting them by ship and then set free. It doesn't take a Jew long to discover what his brothers are doing. So a group of Jews settled in Charleston, South Carolina, where they set up distilleries for making rum and whiskey. They too learned that they could trade with the natives on the west coast of Africa for ivory, and several ships were purchased and sent to Africa, trading the usual glass beads and other cheap ornaments for ivory, which, however, took up but little space on board the ship. It occurred to these Jew traders that they could supply the plantations in the south with black ivory, needed under swampy and malarial conditions which European labor could not tolerate without sickness, and which would not only fill the holds of their ships, but bring enormous profits. This same group had earlier tried selling Indians as slaves, but they found them completely unsatisfactory, as the Indians would not tolerate this type of work. Thus, another segment of the slave trading had become active and profitable outside of Charleston, South Carolina. Several shipholds of black slaves were sent by the Dutch West Indies Company to Manhattan. During this time, there were a number of plantation owners established in the West Indies, and two Jews, Urjair and Sayir, with strong Rothschild connections in Spain, formed an agency called Asiento, which later operated in Holland and England. It was through these connections that Jews in Holland and England exerted influence, and both of these connections cooperated in helping the Jews provide black slaves for the colonists. With the yearly capture and transport of 1 million black slaves, it is not difficult to figure that from 1661 to 1774, 113 years, approximately 110 million slaves had been removed from their native land. About 10%, or 11 million, black slaves reached the colonies alive. We have talked about the small ship Abigail, which could accommodate only 56 people, and yet the profits per trip were enormous, with little or no investment. There were many other ships, but we will concentrate here on only a few, such as the La Fortuna, Hannah, Sally, or the Venue, which made very great profits. The La Fortuna, by the way, transported approximately 217 slaves on each trip. The owner cleared not less than $41,438 from such a trip. These were dollars which the slave dealers could keep, and these were dollars of value which would buy a great deal in return. When one considers that the Jews of Newport owned about 300 slave-transporting ships, active without interruption, docking at Newport, Africa, Charleston, or Virginia, one can approximate the tremendous earnings which made their way to Jewish ship owners. Indeed, the Jews admit that of the 600 ships leaving Newport Harbor into all the world, at least half of them went their way to Africa, and we know what these ships going to Africa were seeking. The fact that Aaron Lopez had control of over more than half of the combined deals of the colonies of Rhode Island with Newport is well known. The well-known Rabbi Morris A. Gutstein, in his book, The Story of the Jews in Newport, attempts to remove these facts, maintaining that there is not any evidence that the Jews were connected with the slave trade. It is therefore imperative to prove that the Jew was indeed connected with the slave trading, especially so since this rabbi insists they had made great contributions and how very blessed their residence became for the city of Newport. Surely Morris A. Gutstein will grant us permission to present the facts which he was unable to find. Turning to one report of the Chamber of Commerce of the Rhode Island colony in the year 1764, we find, for instance, that in the year 1723, quote, a few merchants in Newport, unquote, devised the idea to send their Newport rum to the coast of Africa. It developed into such a great export that in the matter of a few years, quote, several thousand hogsheads, unquote, of rum went that way. To which purpose did this rum serve? The Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C. presents and makes public authentic documents entitled, quote, Documents Illustrative of the History of the Slave Trade in America, unquote. We wish to present a few facts from this particular collection of original documents and scrutinize them at closer range, and not at all to prove the heretofore Rabbi Morris A. Gutstein in error. In this collection of the First American Institute of Learning, we evaluate the capital, Rhode Island, which contributed the main share of the public documentation regarding the slave trading. Here we find documented the recipients of the numerous shipping letters, also letters to the slave dealers, and correspondence to the ship's captains, who were about 15% Jews, living in Newport. Among these we find, for instance, the Jew Isaac Eleazar. He wrote a letter to Captain Christopher Champlin on February 6, 1763, saying he would like to be an agent for a load of slaves. Then follows the Jew Abraham Pereira Mendez and one of the main slave dealers, Jacob Rod Rivera, the father-in-law of Aaron Lopez. And then there is Aaron Lopez himself and many, many other Jews. Although we have considered Aaron Lopez several times, the size of this documented treatise limits us, and we cannot describe all of the writers concerned in the slavery-dealing correspondence, their names and special dates. Rather, we wish to study the documentation of the Carnegie Institute itself, keeping Aaron Lopez in mind. We wish to see what in the main this Jew was pursuing and what his business was. This is due to the fact that Rabbi Morris A. Gutstein presents him as a, quote, lofty and fine civilian of Newport, who was so generous and even, quote, made contributions to the welfare, unquote. In a great number of published, original, unprejudiced writings in the Carnegie Institute, we find that Aaron Lopez pursued a tremendous commerce in rum with the African coast in exchange for slaves. These irrefutable facts are as follows. June 22nd, 1764, a letter by Captain William Stead to Aaron Lopez. July 22nd, 1765, a letter by Aaron Lopez to Captain Nathaniel Briggs. July 22nd, 1765, a letter to Captain Abraham All. February 4th, 1766, a letter to Captain William Stead by Aaron Lopez. March 7th, 1766, a letter by Captain William Stead to Aaron Lopez, and so on and so forth. Aside from that, there are similar statements out of letters by Aaron Lopez in the original, which he directed to Captains Henry Kruger, David Mill, Henry White, Thomas Dolbear, and William Moore. Indeed, one letter by Captain William Moore to Aaron Lopez and Company is particularly revealing and of special mention at this point. We wish to remark on the main contents of this letter, in which Captain Moore writes, quote, "I wish to advise you that your ship Anne docked here night before last with 112 slaves, consisting of 35 men, 16 large youths, 21 small boys, 29 women, 2 grown girls, 9 small girls, and I assure you this is such a one rum cargo, or rum in exchange for slaves, which I have not yet encountered. Among the entire group, there may be 5 to which one could take exception." Unquote. The date of the above letter was November 27th, 1773. We have not yet concluded, because of lack of space, the excerpts and grateful compilations made available by the Carnegie Institute. On November 29th, 1767, the Jew Abraham Pereira Mendez, who had been cheated by one of his own kind from Charleston, where he had journeyed to better control his black cargo, wrote Aaron Lopez at Newport, "These Negroes which Captain Abraham All delivered to me were in such poor condition due to the poor transportation that I was forced to sell 8 boys and girls for a mere 27 pounds, 2 other for 45 pounds, and 2 women each for 35 pounds. No doubt English money. Abraham Pereira Mendez was very angry and accused Aaron Lopez of cheating him. This letter delineates to us that this generous and fine citizen of New York was insatiable in his greed for money. This is what caused the Rabbi Morris A. Gutstein to present this nobleman, Aaron Lopez, to pursue his objectionable methods. Negroes presented to him but a commodity." In all the letters which the Carnegie Institute published, it stresses the lack of human sympathy for the poor Negro slaves. This lack of feeling and compassion for the abused and pitiful blacks at the hands of their Jewish dealers can be read out of the diary of a captain who manned a ship owned by Aaron Lopez. The entries concern a trip from the African coast to Charleston. Moreover, they are authentic documents published by the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C., calling attention to an organization which had heretofore known little or nothing about. Neither had they encountered further publicity in books or newspapers. Therefore, it is not to be wondered at that the facts of the leading share of American Jews in the slave trade could be pointed out as a monopoly and unknown to the non-Jewish Americans, including the great masses of people all over the world. Others, however, acquainted with the facts, had good reason to remain painfully quiet. The captain of another ship, the Othello, among other things, makes the following entries in his diary. February 6th, 1 man drowned in the process of loading. March 18th, 2 women went overboard because they had not been locked up. April 6th, 1 man dead with flux. April 13th, 1 woman dead with flux. May 7th, 1 man dead with flux. June 16th, 1 man dead by Cap Henry. June 21st, 1 man dead by James Fluce. July 5th, 1 woman dead with fever. July 6th, 1 girl, sick for 2 months, died. This vessel was on its way for 5 months. What terrible and unspeakable suffering was the lot of these millions of blacks, who were torn with brutal force from their friendly African huts, jammed together like animals below deck, and then sold with less concern than selling a head of cattle. Small wonder that 10 of them died, being purchased for just a few dollars and then sold for the sum of $2,000. Some Negroes managed through insurrection to gain control of one or another ship and turned it around with full sails toward their African home. The crew of one slave ship, called 3 Friends, for instance, tortured their black cargo in such manner that the Negroes reciprocated in a bloody rebellion. They killed the captain and the entire crew and threw the dead overboard. They then sailed back to Africa, where they had barely escaped their hard-won freedom. A similar fate struck the slave ship Amistad. Among the slaves was the son of an enemy tribal chief. Once the ship was underway, he schemed with his compatriots to attack the ship's crew. Following a bloody battle, they managed to capture the captain. The Negro prince forced him to turn back to Africa. Then, in the evening, under cover of darkness, he changed his course, zigzagged for months until he came close to the American coast and encountered a government ship. This took place in the year 1839, when slave trading was already forbidden and illegal. What the movie Amistad will not tell you is the Jewish involvement in the slave trade. The Negro slaves were freed and the captain punished. These sea voyages were not without danger when they had black cargo, which accounts for the fact that the Jews most always engaged non-Jewish captains. The slave dealers preferred to remain in their offices and counted the fat winnings following each journey, such as Aaron Lopez, who left his heirs one of the largest fortunes in the New England era. When reviewing the documented facts contained herein, it is important that one always remembers that it was a lucky captain who did not lose more than 9 out of 19 slaves on the return trip. It is equally important to remember that these poor black creatures had to lie in human excrement for the entire trip. Think about it. No wonder sickness and disease took such a high toll. Remember the figures. Approximately 110 million black people were captured and removed from their homeland in Africa. Only 11 million of these black slaves reached the colonies alive. And the Jews still talk about the Germans and Hitler and how supposedly 6 million Jews were exterminated during World War II. This is the greatest lie ever perpetuated upon the people of the world, whereas the story of the poor black slaves is documented with truth. The evidence is still available for the people of the world to see. The Carnegie Institute of Technology is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As this movie and the document which I am narrating from is distributed, eventually reaching the hands of the Jews, the evidence will probably be removed and destroyed until finally all documentation is removed which is damaging to the Jew. The Jews have been engaged in this practice for centuries. Truth, however, truth which bears fact, cannot remain covered or hidden forever. And more truths are being disclosed by those of us who intend to free America of these sons of the devil, the Jews. The published documentation contained herein was obtained from the Carnegie Institute of Learning, presently known as the Carnegie Institute of Technology. The following is a partial list of the slave ships owned by the Jews. The Abigail by Aaron Lopez, Moses Levy, and Jacob Franks. The Crown by Isaac Levy and Nathan Simpson. The Nassau by Moses Levy, Four Sisters by Moses Levy. The Anne and Eliza by Justice Bosch and John Abrams. The Prudent Betty by Henry Kruger and Jacob Phoenix. The Hester by Mordecai and David Gomez. The Elizabeth by David and Mordecai Gomez. The Antique by Nathan Marston and Abram Lale. The Betsy by De Wolf. The Poi by James De Wolf. The White Horse by Jan de Sviets. The Expedition by John and Jacob Roosevelt. The Charlotte by Moses and Sam Levy and Jacob Franks. The Carcoa by Moses and Sam Levy. Slave runners, also owned by Jews, were the La Fortuna, the Hannah, the Sally, and the Venue. Some of the Jews of Newport and Charleston who were engaged in the distillery or slavery trade, or both, were Isaac Gomez, Hyman Levy, Jacob Malhado, Naphtali Myers, David Hart, Joseph Jacobs, Moses Ben Franks, Moses Gomez, Isaac Dias, Benjamin Levy, David Yeshubim, Jacob Pinto, Jacob Turk, Daniel Gomez, James Lucana, Jan de Sviets, Isaac Elizer, Jacob Rod, and many others. Of some 600 ships leaving the port of Newport, more than 300 were engaged in the slave trade. A typical cargo of one ship, La Fortuna, was 217 slaves, which cost about $4,300 and sold for $41,438. Only about 10% of the slave ship captains were Jews, not wanting to subject themselves to the rigors of the 6-month journey. They preferred to stay at home and continue their distillery operations, which continued to supply rum and whiskey to the Indians, for many years at a very great profit. You can continue your own research through the following references and documentation. Finally, we cannot undertake even this brief history of the modern Jew without taking note of a phenomenon which has confounded Gentile societies for 20 centuries. This is the ability of the Jewish people to collectively retain their identity despite centuries of exposure to Christian civilization. To any student of Judaism, or to the Jews themselves, this phenomena is partly explained by the fact that Judaism is neither mainly a religion, nor mainly a racial matter, nor yet is it simply a matter of nationality. Rather, it is all three. It is a kind of trinity. Judaism is best described as a nationality built on the twin pillars of race and religion. All this is closely related to another aspect of Judaism, namely the persecution myth. Since first appearing in history, we find the Jews propagating the idea that they are an abused and persecuted people. And this idea is, and has always been, central in Jewish thinking. The myth of persecution is the adhesive and cement of Judaism. Without it, Jews would have long since ceased to exist, their racial, religious nationality notwithstanding. It is a fact that the Jewish people have suffered numerous hardships in the course of their history, but this is true of other peoples too. The chief difference is that the Jews have kept score. We must repeat. They have kept score. They have made a tradition of persecution. A casual slaughter of thousands of Christians is remembered by no one in 50 years, but a disability visited upon a few Jews is preserved forever in Jewish histories, and they tell their woes not only to themselves, but to a sympathetic world as well.
And so we're at war now, and we see Putin invading and starting a great World War III and everything by invading Ukraine. And that's a bunch of bullshit. It's a bunch of horseshit. Okay. I actually think now that I was inaccurate about Xi, and Xi will be participating in this as well. And I think that they're going to invade Taiwan. But what's going on is the eradication of the biolabs that are controlled by the Khazarian mafia. And by that we also include Fauci, Biden, all of the fuckers in the United States who are also controlled by the Khazarian mafia. And we note that they all have huge bank accounts here. And look at how Zelensky, the head of Ukraine as a nation, has got this big, huge $34 million villa over here in Florida. So what's he doing? Planning on bugging out when it gets too cold there? Anyway, it's all interconnected, right? And so we're entering a period of war here. We're in a period of war now. We've been in a period of war all of my life, since 1963 in the assassination of Kennedy. And so we're in a period of war here that's developing, and as I had forecast months back, the language is bursting out. Now, our war language is going to be tainted by the other side because they're trying to gin it up as a nation-state war. Oh, evil Russians. And that's not it. Now we've got a case here that is really bizarre for the mainstream media, for the powers that be, because you've got a lot of people in the United States saying, yay Putin, yay Putin. And he's supposed to be the enemy according to our powers that be. And so this would be the equivalent of a bunch of people here in the United States after the bombing and everything had actually started saying, yay Hitler, right? In the 1940s. You just wouldn't see that happening. Here we're not coalescing the way that the powers that be want around this idea that Putin is the bad guy, that there's this World War III and so on, because so many of us know what the fuck is going on, and we're awake to the history and the problems that have been caused by these other fuckers here in Khazaria, and they've just got to go. Okay, so we've got to get rid of all of these things, all these people. Now, here's something to understand. In my opinion, Judaism had been taken over. Okay, they were the first group that was infiltrated by the bug, and for there are a lot of reasons having to do with the nature of a philosophical trait within the source code for Judaism, okay? And so this is where we get into this issue of source code. I'm of the opinion, because I bought a set here of the Talmud, and I've read as much of that thing as I could possibly plow through. And there are parts of it that are truly disgusting, okay? To see aspects of pedophilia ritualized, okay, codified. So it is a source code at that stage. And I won't go into that at the moment, all right? But in any event, within the Talmud, you have to understand you cannot read it alone. It's 63 volumes, it's huge, it's commentary. A lot of people think of it as comedy, as it's thought of in many, many, many different contexts. But my way of thinking is that this is a meta layer of a code base, and that the Talmud has to be used to read the Jewish Bible, and that this is why in the Talmud they are so against. It was really funny because there were a lot of people in 325 AD that told Constantine, "Oh my God, you stupid fucking emperor!" They didn't say it that way. Don't join the Jewish Old Covenant with the New Testament. Don't do it. They're not related, blah, 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 blah. They did it anyway, right? So the Bible is created as this combined work that basically includes the Torah with the New Testament. But it's really funny is that there were a lot of these people that were on the Jewish side saying, or on the Talmudic side, not the Jewish side, but on the Talmudic side saying, don't do it. But it was necessary that it be done, and Constantine, unlike Justinian later on, well, I won't go into that, but Constantine was maneuvered into doing this by Khazarians in his cabinet structure, because they had been infiltrating for years and years and years. As I say, for at least 6,000 years, they've been, the people that have been involved with all of this Khazarian stuff have been involved in this deep death cult that I frame as space alien influence, right? Anyway, though, so we have here the Talmud as a meta layer that is floating above, and you read the text of the Jewish Bible through the lens of the Talmud to understand this other massive layer of knowledge that can be gained from doing so. Now, this is not something most people are going to want to do for lots of reasons, because it gets you into some really seriously dark shit. But it gets even worse than that, or it is even more magnified than that, because there's this thing called the Zohar, and it is part of the Jewish Kabbalists, okay? And this is from where we get the Cabal, right? But the Kabbalists are, they're like, so the Zohar has to be used as a lens to move and magnify and cite, as in terms of position effectively, the Talmud, so that you can read the underlying stuff with an understanding.
So you want proof? You want proof that the ancient Israelites, the Hebrews, the Israelites, like of the Bible, the biblical Israelites and Hebrews were African, or we call African today. Africa is like a pseudonym, modern pseudonym, but we know what we mean when we say someone African, right? So the ancient Israelites is what you and people call today, right? Just to keep it so-called politically correct, as African. So the ancient Israelites were African people. Now there's a lot of different ways that different ones show and prove this and bring forth evidence. And a lot of people debate. They say, no, the Israelites, are, they'll say Semitic people. And then they'll say that they're trying to make you believe that the Semitic people were not black people. And they say those are the Semites, and they'll say Hamites, because they play this so-called Ham, Shem, and Japheth game. Like as though you're illiterate. But if you read, it's actually Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But here's my number one proof right here. Let's just share this right here. Number one proof that the biblical Israelites, the ancient Israelites were, and we can say are, but first let's just prove the past, were African people. How can we prove this? We use visual, iconography, ancient art. What sort of proof shall we use? Well, how do we know anything about the Hebrews and Israelites? We know because they say the Bible, right? That's what's written in the Bible, what's written in the scripts and the scripture, yeah? But those scriptures that we have written, especially in the Western Gentile world, they were translated, right? They were translated from ancient scriptures, right? They say like in Hebrew, like the King James Bible. The King James Bible, they say, well, that they come from Hebrew. been translated from Hebrew, right? And then the people of the book are known as Hebrews. So there's a lot of archaeological proof that proves it, but then people can debate, especially if we just look at so-called physical or outer features, and that's kind of getting into the inferiority, that poses as supremacy, but we don't like to even say so-called white supremacy, because we don't want to enforce or speak a lie or encourage, deception. So they call it white supremacy, but we don't want to go there and just look at so-called just skin color. We can, of course, we can use that because Africans tend to have a particular traits, right, that distinguishes them, right, this root race people from all the other peoples on the face of the earth. So we could go there, but people will debate that. I'm going to bring to you and show to you and share with you one of the basic proofs that a lot of folks, I think the majority of people that try to debate this subject matter, when we say that the ancient Israelites, the biblical Israelites, let's say it like this, the biblical Israelites, the Israelites of the so-called Bible, we're going to go from low degrees to high degrees, from the so-called translation to the origination, were, right, African people.
Revelations chapter 3 verse 7 through 9. 7. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, These things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David, he that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. 8. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name. 9. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee.
So, how are you going to prove that they were African people? I know people say, you can't prove this. Yes, we can. The proof already been in our faces and in our ears. We've been hearing it, but some people don't even know the significance of it. I'm not even saying it just yet. I'm not going to say it just yet until first I just show some of the, other proofs, other proofs positive. Let's just scroll through some of this other proof positive concerning who's who. You know what I mean? Who's who in the zoo? Who's who in the Bible? We can go to this right here. We're gonna address this racism, here. But I said the racism, is how they try to misrepresent the historical artifacts, they're playing their color game. But still, this is still further proof as well, right? That the people of the book, known as the Bible, were African people. All right, so here, let's get it just through here. Just want to show and prove some, art and facts right here. There's various art and facts we can go to, but here's the big proof. Let's map it out. All right, we talk about this continent that's known as Africa. All right, this continent that's known as Africa. All right, kind of interesting. We put this forward. Our people, the ones lost now found over here, and now those who are in the state of Israel are putting this forward. Looking familiar, right? Looks similar, right? Now this here says that this is the Yehudi, right? The Yehudim, the Judeans or the Judahites, known in the translation as Jews, we the black Jews, fleeing into the wilderness that becomes known as Africa, right? From the Roman murderers, right? In 70 AD, right? Means that many sub-Saharan Africans are direct descendants, right? From Yisrael, from Israel and the Judeans, the Yehudi, right? By blood, right? By bloodline, right? Now that should be a proof right there, looking at that historical proof right there. But for some, they say that's not good enough, right? That's not good enough. Well, let's just go here for a moment. We'll return to the suitcase just in a moment, momentarily. Because what shall I use to prove that the biblical Israelites were African people? What? All right, before it was named Africa, this is Grace here. Before it was named Africa, now they say that, well, this is Ham. Now, you listen to the white man too much, but you're not really listening to him. You're not listening to what he says, but he doesn't say. You know what I mean? You're listening to what he wants to make you believe, right? Before it was called Africa, some say it was called the land of Ham. yeah, the Hamites were there, but that's if you believe that the only black man according to the biblical narrative was Ham. See, that's the first lie right there. You believe that Ham was not, or Ham was not the first black man, according to the Bible, approaching this from a biblical perspective, based on what is written. So how do we know about the Hebrews? How do we know about the Israelites? We know about the Hebrews and the Israelites chiefly and mainly, right, from the Bible. I think this is an interesting right here. You see what it says, land of Ham, right? Let's zoom down here and we look at the linguistics. You see what it says right there? Afro-Asiatic. Afro-Asiatic. Now, when we hear Asiatic, we're looking at the Asiatic black man. You know, the black man of Asia, the ancient black man of Asia. Right? Do we have proof of that? Well, of course we have proof of that, right? Listen, how is this not part of Africa, right? When this is. See, because it all depends on who you want to believe, you know, or based on what they make you believe, right? For thousands of years before so-called European or white inferiority posing as supremacy geography, Arabia, get this, Arabia was part of Africa, right? Arabia was part of Africa. But here, let's touch on this right here. We're going to look at it linguistically, you know, so the linguistic approach is what we're going to use to prove, right? To show and prove that the biblical Israelites were African people, right? We can look at many of their descendants today, right? Both at home, you know, in the East, and those of us scattered abroad. Right? We can use that as proof as well. But here we go. Let's go to where's our download photo? All right. So first things first, right here. All right. Let's go about it this way right here. Let's look at this right here. You see what it says? Proto-Afro-Asiatic, right? Remigration to Africa, Proto-Chadic, they say Proto-Egyptian, Proto-Omotic, right? Proto-Cushitic, Proto-Berber, and then you see over here, Proto-Semitic, right? Let's go over here, Proto-Afro-Asiatic, right? Well, the proof that the biblical Israelites are, right? Or let's first point to the past, and we'll bring it forward to today, were what we call today African people, is the linguistic, is the Bible. But it's the Bible. What language was the scriptures written in? They say Hebrew, right? And Hebrew is classified as what sort of a language? Hebrew is classified as what sort of a language? As an Afro-Asiatic, right? Or Afro-Semitic. Do you want further proof? Should we present further proof of this? Right? Should we present further proof of this? Well, further proof of this shall be presented. All right, just using this, we can zoom in on these things here. These are just some points of reference that are very important to refer to right here. So we have the Afro-Asiatic family, get into the linguistics, the breakdown, Afro-Asiatic family. This is what many call it today, right? This is one of the ways they refer to the language of the people of the book, the Bible, right? The Hebrew, right? And even if we would include the Aramaic, we still have an Afro-Semitic, right? An Afro-Semitic language. So here, let's go to our research right here. Keep this as a short video. Hopefully we can follow up more on this. But the proof right here, right, that the biblical Hebrews and Israelites were African people. The proof of it is the language. Hebrew is classified as what sort of a language? As a Afro-Semitic language. But they like to run the game on you. They just say Semitic, Hebrew, Semitic, Hebrew, Semitic language. But then if you go and look up it from an academic and a scholarly perspective, those who really dig in and research this, right, and classify it based on the evidence, Hebrew is a Afro-Semitic language. So look what we looked up. We looked up Afro-Semitic. You did the Google. You can Google this. Got the Wikipedia page right here. Afro-Asiatic languages. Pause. What is it called? So Afro-Semitic, right, Afro-Semitic, this is those researchers, say researching along the lines of the scriptures, the Bible, they would refer to as Afro-Semitic, but nowadays they use the term Afro-Asiatic. Remember we showed you the meme just earlier that for thousands of years before the so-called European or the white man started making his maps, that Arabia was part of what was called Arabia. What's called Arabia was part of what's called Africa, right? What's called Arabia was part of what's called today Africa. But note this right here. When you look up Afro-Semitic, this is the first thing that comes up. Afro-Asiatic languages. Let's read for a moment. It says the Afro-Asiatic languages, or Afro-Asiatic, also known as, keyword, also known as. From my research, they refer to it as Afro-Semitic. That's the older terminology. It seems as though the newer terminology or related terminology is Afro-Asiatic, right? But whether you want to say Afro-Semitic, Afro-Shemitic, or you want to say Afro-Asiatic, one thing you are saying is Afro. Did we miss that? Black is beautiful. What were the brothers and sisters wearing? Afro. Isn't that black? Isn't that black? So the language of the Bible is Afro-Semitic, you say? Is Afro-Asiatic? Then you want to question when we say, well, we are Israel, we are Beta Israel, we are Hebrew, we are Israelites. How dare you question? What's the proof of it? The proof of it is that it's Afro. This means that Hebrew correctly is an African language, an Afro-Semitic language. Let's look at the definition right here. Wikipedia, for example, the Afro-Asiatic languages, or Afro-Asiatic, depends on how they hyphenize it, right? Also known as Hamito, Ham. They say Ham, Shem, and Japheth, Ham. Notice Hamito, which one is first? Ham. You know that? Which one's first? Ham. Hamito-Semitic. Wait. Hamito-Semitic, or some prefer to put the Semitic first, right? Semito-Hamitic. Wait, hold on for a moment. They told you about Ham, Shem, and Japheth. They told you their version, their perversion, right? Their misreading of the Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Once they say Ham, Shem, and Japheth, you know they're not really referring to the source text. And we refer to the source text, it is Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But the language is Hebrew, and that language is Afro. It's Afro. That means that's the African part right there. Notice which part is first. Afro-Semitic. What part is first? Afro. Afro-Asiatic. What part is first? Afro. Right? And they say, and sometimes also as Afro-Asian. Afro-Asian. That's interesting because black people, black man in Americas during the time of Rastafari, the Royal Order of the Ethiopian Hebrews, the 20s and into the 30s, we refer to ourselves, this is little known, but it's very important for us to consider it even today, as Afro-Americans, as Afro-American. As you see what says Afro-Asian, Afro-Americans, Afro-Asian. So it should not be any coincidence that we have such teaching within our community, diasporic community, of the Asiatic black man. Asiatic black man, the black man of Asia. People say, well, like look in Asia today, you see differences over there in that region of the world. Well, look at America. If you were to come to America, go in a time machine 1,000 years ago, you would not find Tom, Dick, and Harry from England in America 1,000 years ago. You follow my point? If you went to Australia, in fact, 1,000 years ago, you would still be able to encounter the Tasmanian people before they were massacred and genocided. Genocide is a genocide. And that word was coined by they translating an Afro-Semitic speaker, the King of Kings, the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, when he spoke in Amharic, an Afro-Shemitic, Afro-Asiatic language, they translated what he said, and then because of that, they coined the word genocide, killing a seed, right? Suicide, genocide, yeah. So you see what it says, sometimes also as Afro-Asian are a language family of about, you want more? Let's go into a little bit more right here, right? So here we go right here. Here they got it in the bold. Here they got it in the bold relief, Afro-Asiatic. So have I proven that the Israelites, if the Israelites spoke, if all we know about, if not all we know, but the main thing that we know, the main witness right? We could say the main witness of the ancient Hebrews and the biblical Israelites, the earliest and the most point of reference is what? Because we always say, well, there's the Bible, and the scriptures, but where is all the other evidence? That's what people like to say, right? So the point of focus should be on the Bible, because that's how we know about the Israelites, because of the Bible, right? Now, of course, we have it in all these translations, but even these translations, many of them will tell you that this was translated out of, the original languages. And when we're talking about the Old Testament, the foundation, right, of the Bible, we have Hebrew. And Hebrew is a Afro-Semitic, Afro-Asiatic language. Afro-Asiatic, also known as Hemito-Semitic. Now, Hemito-Semitic is like a clever way of saying Afro-Semitic. And then they flip it and say Semito-Hamitic. And sometimes also as Afro-Asian, are a language family of about 300 languages that are spoken predominantly, not only, but predominantly in the geographic sub-regions of Western, not Eastern, but Western Asia, North Africa, the Horn of Africa, I like to call it the Horn of Ethiopia, but the Horn of Africa, and parts of the Sahara, the Sahel, with the exception of its Semitic branch. Wait, hold on for a moment. Semitic branch. That means from the Afro-Semitic, there is a branch. So that it's like pointing the origin to the Afro part. You get me? With the exception of its Semitic branch, all branches of the Afro-Asiatic family are exclusively native to the African continent. You see how you see that slick shit? You see that slick stuff right there. With the exception of its Semitic branch, because they know that Hebrew, all right, they can't avoid it. In fact, modern Hebrew and a lot of the stuff that you see, the other J words, the other Jews doing, is a lot of it is based on, the ability to have the modern Hebrew is because they did a lot of studies on the Ethiopic and Afro-Asiatic, Afro-Shemitic language. This is all proven. This is what we study. This is our research. This is our lane. With the exception of its Semitic branch, all branches of the Afro-Asiatic family are exclusively native to the African continent. But remember that Africa and Asia, from our ancestors, the so-called pseudo-white supremacy, European, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant perspective, the ancient world included Asia and Africa. But the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant European, they come with the ancient Roman thing, divide and conquer. You get me? So it says Afro-Asiatic languages have over 500 million native speakers. All right, 500 million native speakers. Now, the slick thing is, let's see how deeply they try to hide the Hebrew. Watch, let's read. Afro-Asiatic languages have over 500 million native speakers, which is the fourth largest number of native speakers of any language family. After Indo-European, Sino-Tibetan, Niger-Congo. So now let's check out these language family groups, right? There's Afro-Asiatic. They say it's the fourth largest number of native speakers of any language family. After the Indo-European, right? Indo-European, right? So that means Hebrew is not Indo-European. It's Afro-Semitic, right? It's not Hindu-European. It's not Sino, right? Tibetan, right? Sino, linking with the China, Sin, like the Sinai, Sin. That's the link of the Chinese, even in the Bible. Sino, Shino, Shina. Niger-Congo. Now, Niger-Congo is on the African continent, but that's another language family. Check. The phylum has 6 branches: Berber, Chadic, Cushitic, Egyptian, Semitic, Omotic. Now, Omotic, take note, brothers and sisters, especially those who want to study like ancient Semitawi, or what they call Egypt, ancient Egypt, you know what I mean? The study of the two lands. But notice, so the phylum has 6 branches. What's the 6 branches? Berber, Chadic, Cushitic, Egyptian, Semitic, Omotic. The most widely spoken modern Afro-Asiatic language or dialect continuum. Now this is interesting. Take note. We have such a thing called a dialect continuum. So there's the language, and then there are dialects of that language, and there's also what is known as a dialect continuum. So the most widely spoken modern Afro-Asiatic language or dialect continuum by far is Arabic, a de facto group. Because it exists, it's a fact. You know what I mean? Not law, de jure, but de facto group of distinct language varieties within the Semitic branch. And this is true of Arabic. There is a lot of dialectic. The dialectic continuum is very, very interesting. Like we have some brethren I know from Yemen, and we be speaking, and dialoguing about this, that, like Arabic, the dialect in Yemen is different than in Cairo, different than in Egypt, as well as different than what's spoken even in Saudi, you know what I mean? And then what's spoken in other places, so it's very important to kind of understand. It's like, I compare it for ones who might not be familiar, like with Spanish or with languages that link with, Spanish, like how you have Spanish and then you have Portuguese. But then you have Spanish, and like Spain Spanish is different than what many ones who are referred to as Hispanic. So the Hispanic speakers, they're speaking a dialect continuum, but it's a different dialect, and it kind of descends from, but then it becomes Creole in, different places. But we have this going on. Now, the languages that evolved from Proto-Arabic have around 313 million native speakers, concentrated primarily in the Middle East and North Africa. Think about it. They have 313 million. They want to tell us, right, the once lost now found Beta Israel about birth control. Think about it for a moment. How they got so many people? They said, well, the Arabs and Islam and this and that, they are forced to be reckoned with. Well, of course. You know what I mean? The most vital resource of any nation is its people. People. A little bit more right here. Let's scroll down. So they go right here. They scroll down. Now remember, we were looking up. What we looked up was Afro-Semitic. But instead of them giving us Afro-Semitic, they said, oh, you're looking for this? Take that. You're looking for this? Take that. So here, in addition to the languages spoken today, Afro-Asiatic includes many ancient languages. Remember we said the ancient Hebrews and the biblical Israelites. All right? Check the word sound. Right? Ancient Hebrews and the biblical Israelites. That means the Israelites of the Bible. Right? The primary source or resource or point of reference to the Hebrews and Israelites by far is the Bible. And the Bible, right, as written in the people, right, they spoke the language that is considered an Afro-Semitic language, and this is Hebrew. Now here in our brief presentation right here, it says, in addition to the languages spoken today, Afro-Asiatic includes many what? Ancient languages. Not just many languages, but we're talking about ancient languages. And we can add to this right here, not just ancient languages, but just to clarify for, our purposes here in our presentation, ancient biblical languages, right? Such as Egyptian. There's actually a lot, not a lot, but there are some Ro in Kemet words, Metu net, there's some it's Egyptian Smaitawi word that says such as Egyptian, which forms a distinct branch of the family. Notice what we say about Egyptian. When we say Egyptian, we're not talking about modern Arabic, modern Arab so-called Egypt. No, we're not talking about Greco-Roman descendant modern Arab Egypt. We're not talking about that. Pale red Arab Egypt. We're not talking about that. We're talking about ancient. When people talk about the Ra'in or Ro'in Kemet, or the Metu Neta, the Metu Neda, that's what we're speaking about. And they're saying that that forms a distinct branch of the family. And within the Semitic family, you see this part right here? Within the what? Let's zoom in on this right here. This is the part that we're zooming in on right here. Afro-Asiatic includes many ancient languages, right? So, and notice, Afro-Semitic. Now, they might try to change it up now that y'all are getting this truth. They try to say, well, no, it's not Afro-Semitic, it's Semitic-Africanic. They do that. It all depends. You see what I'm saying? It all depends on you, my people. You know what I mean? The most vital resource of any nation is its people. And within the Semitic family, Akkadian, Hebrew, and hail up to Ras Taharka. Gotta hail up Brother Ras Taharka. You know, we'll be getting into some of these interesting areas, you know, of our linguistic studies, you know, and it'd be, you know, good if more of us can recognize the importance. This is in the beginning was the word. We say word, sound, and power, but word comes before sound. So within the Semitic family, Akkadian, Hebrew, you see Hebrew right there? Phoenician, other Canaanite languages, Amorite, Ugaritic, and Aramaic. It's kind of interesting how they put this in a, you know, like it's almost in a very interesting order, right? The Akkadian languages, you know, but notice what they say, that though this is a Semitic, right, this is part of the Semitic branch, the Semitic branch is connected to the Afro-Semitic or the Afro root. Have you checked that right there? You have to check that. While there is no consensus among historical linguists, right, historical linguists concerning the original homeland of the Afro-Asiatic family, or the period when the parent language, which they call Proto, like that first Afro-Asiatic was spoken. But most agree that it was located within a region of Northeast Africa. That means the Horn of Africa. That means that what is called today Ethiopia, right? That region, the Horn of Africa and Ethiopia region, is at the heart of it. I mean, just think about all the different peoples, right? Some people who are manifestly, you could say, according to their culture, tradition, and their own admittance, they are Cushitic. They are, you could say, of the Hamitic stock, like say the Oromos and others. And then you have others, right, who have some links or even claims to Shemitic. But then you have these peoples, these different peoples, all dwelling for thousands of years, right, in a, you know, contiguous region, right, and also mating with each other. And then we have forms of the language, like say Amharic, right, which, like Hebrew, right, presents an ancient form of what we can call a Creole. You know, when two or more languages kind of blend to form something very, very unique. This is what it says, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, right? From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliant, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. Let's do this right here. From beyond the rivers, right? Beyond the rivers. Let's put this here. Beyond, right? Let's say the rivers. I think, okay, let's go back here. You can see that, yeah, it broke off right there. Beyond the rivers. Here we go right here. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, like worshipers, right? Even the daughter, the bait, yes, Beta is Israel. The Beta Israel, when we say bait is house, but bat is daughter. Bat, right? Or as they anglicize it, bath, but it is bat, is daughter, right? Even the daughter of my dispersed. Who's the daughter of my dispersed? That's we over here, right? The Beta Israel, the Falasha, right? The Falasha over here. I and I in exile here in the Americas and the Caribbean. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, pointing to I and I people, we could say at home, right? And my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, I and I abroad, it says, shall bring mine offering. Why is this verse significant? Because Zephaniah 2, chapter 3, verse 10, right, is really the fulfillment of Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, which often is pointing to, for then will I turn to the people a pure language. The pure language is not the first language, right? Ones make the mistake. When we spoke about even the Kings of Kings language, that Royal Amharic, and we referred to that link with Ethiopia here, as we have in verse 10 with that region. Notice how this is also supported, right, by the linguistic science and the evidence, right, the real world evidence that goes back for thousands of years, right? So they're trying to say, well, where was the home of this Proto-Afro-Asiatic or Proto-Afro-Shemitic? You see what I'm saying? See, they don't like to use the word Shemitic, but you saw it in the notes where they said, in the Wikipedia notes, they say Hamito. So when we say Afro-Shemitic, it could be said Hamo or Kamo. Many of us have even coined that there, Kamo-Shemitic, right? That Kamo-Shemitic. And right there, that blows the racist, you know, pseudo-white supremacist, white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, counterfeit Christian, Ham, Shem, and Japheth lie right out of the waters.
With the information presented, one should discern the intricate reality unfolding. A wealth of additional details exists, revealing that certain contemporary Jewish individuals, particularly within the newly formed state of Israel and interconnected with the United States government, the entertainment industry, the judicial system, the prison complex, and beyond, exhibit a disregard for their non-affiliation with the ancestral bloodline of the biblical Hebrews. Remarkably, present-day rabbis openly acknowledge this fact. In light of this, I earnestly implore the lost tribes of Israel and the lost tribe of Judah to awaken to their true identity and embark on a modern-day exodus out of spiritual Egypt. While the promised land may not yet be prepared, the wilderness beckons as a sanctuary where we can unite with our Creator, tend to our own affairs, and thrive on the simple blessings bestowed upon us by life.